Let's talk about how to complete your Archon hunts, and most specifically, defeat the Archon in the final mission. These other two are pretty simple, but there is one thing that you should be noting, and that is the level of the enemies here, and therefore you should probably be doing this once you have at least done a little bit of the steel path progression, and make sure that you have at least some arcanes in your slots, and have gotten some slots from the actual steel path itself. Although these probably are not essential, this is just the kind of state that you should be in when you are coming into this. Talking about setup then, probably the most essential thing out of everything that I have equipped here is the epitaph. This is because the Archons have a damage protection buff on them, which stops you doing like high damage, and we are unable to use things like pillage to strip their armor down. So what that means to us is that, generally speaking, if we want to have effects on the Archons, then we need to be using status effects, and the epitaph is perfect. It comes with cold procs as standard, which means firing this a few times is going to slow it down, making it much easier to target, and we can put on heat and corrosive so that we can strip off some of its armor as we are priming it with the epitaph. Keeping with that then, we are also making sure that perpetual agony is on here, because we want to make sure that when we get that status on there, it stays on long enough to defeat the boss, but it really shouldn't take you that long once you have that sorted. When it comes to your primary weapon then, we are looking for rate of fire and multi-shot. This is because the damage cushion that the Archon has works to a higher degree on shots that have more damage. So this means if you try and go in there with something like the Archoplasmor, that is not going to do all that well. You want something that has good rate of fire and good multi-shot. That is going to get you better results. In addition to that, crit is going to help, of course, but I went with an Incarnate weapon, which works just fine. We want to keep the good status on there, and the damage type we should be going for is radiation. I really didn't need to have cold on here. This technically was probably not doing all that much for me. I could have had extra damage when you guys see going through in a moment. But basically, this is what's important. You want radiation damage on there. So if you have been through whispers in the wall, which you probably should have been, you'll be able to get radiated reload, which is going to add extra radiation damage on there, which is going to be useful. But overall, I just went with high voltage and thermite rounds, although we probably would have gotten way more damage out of doing the full mods rather than the status ones. But either way, this is what I went for. It's what you're going to see in action as we go through the video. Pick any warframe that is fairly survivable. I went with Revenant because the Mesmer skin is pretty effective at keeping us up and not suffering with too much status. I did try Hildrin, and if there are bombards in the mission, it'll just strip all of its shields down, so I probably don't recommend Hildrin. Wisp was good though when I tried Wisp. Protea seemed to do okay. Octavia has done fine. So long as it has a pretty good defensive gimmick on it, it's generally speaking going to be pretty good. Lastly, when it comes to setup, I recommend bringing an amp that is going to have a wide fire arc. That is because as we fight the Archons, they will summon bodyguards, and one of them has a variant that has like a chest full of canisters, and we need to target the canisters to be able to continue targeting the Archon, and they can be kind of annoying to target. We have to hit them with void damage, so doing it with something that has a good spread on it will just make that way easier. And lastly, I reckon it's a good idea to have put a decent damage boosting ability onto your Warframe. So in my case with Revenant, we have Raw on there so that we can give ourselves damage boost against the Archon and against the Deacons that we'll have to fight during the mission. Once you're all set up and ready to go then, get the two missions done beforehand. These are very, very simple, and then eventually you'll be able to get down to the Archon Hunt itself. This is a 3-phase assassination, effectively, that we can do once a week to get ourselves some Archon shards. The first encounter I find is generally much easier because you can get on in there, get the cold procs on to slow it down, shoot it in the face, and generally speaking, before it can even do anything, you'll have it down to half health in no time. Once that's done, you'll have a marker that leads you to a red door. Once you reach the red door, the marker is then going to split into 2 more markers, which is effectively just telling you that we now need to hunt down 2 Deacons. When we get to the Deacons, we will need to defeat its bodyguards. There are only a few. You don't need to like destroy all of the enemies, but just attack the enemies that are around it until its health turns orange, which is how we know we can damage it. You can strip its armor in this point as well, so you should be able to get the epitaph on there. Defeat the Deacon, take its helmet back to the door, and we need to do this twice. Obviously in a squad this will be way quicker, and that will open the door so that we can reach the final encounter. This can be where it's been a bit more difficult, especially if you burst down its health in the first phase. This is because it's now going to start going through all of its defensive phases at once because it's lost all of its health. So with the Hound command, for example, that I've got in the video, is going to split into all of its clones. We've got to clear the clones out, find which one it is. Then it summons its Oculus bodyguards. We have to defeat those. Then it goes back into clones again. Then it summons Oculus bodyguards again because it's got its second set. And then we can finally actually start doing damage to defeat it. So when it comes to the second phase, it can be a little bit annoying just dealing with all of its phases. But just bear with it, and it really shouldn't be too much of an issue, especially if you do go public and bring a squad in. That concludes my guide on how to beat your first Archon. I just want to take a second to thank the people that have been commenting really helpful tips on a lot of the videos recently. So if you've gotten to the end of this video and you still have some questions, go down into the comments, because on the past like 10 to 20 videos, you guys have been absolutely outstanding. Like, I've been learning tons. Like, I thought I was pretty good at Warframe, but it turns out you guys like know way more than I do sometimes. So thank you very much to the people that have been coming back to the videos and leaving your experiences and tips and stuff that help other players out. But hopefully the basic loadout, and I think it's pretty easy really to get the Epitaph and the Fenmore. So hopefully you guys can beat your first Archon and start getting those Archon shards, and I'll catch you all in the next video, which should be the Netrocells.